the last net 2.0 is about like getting the energy. And it's like, I was thinking about this presentation, like, oh, it's on Zoom. I'd like to like be with people and not necessarily touch you because I am big on boundaries, but like feel it. So at least with the screen, it can be like, yeah, woo, yeah, come on. So yeah. Hi guys, thanks for having me. I know a couple of you, but I'm excited that I don't know a lot of you. So I sometimes feel like with stories, I repeat myself a lot. So a few of you haven't heard them, so this is exciting. But as Lynn shared, you know, I started a podcast, and my original idea for this presentation was actually more about flushing out your story when you don't have a clear vision. Because so often as entrepreneurs, when you go to motivational talks and all this stuff, you always hear, you have to have a crystal clear vision if that's what you want. And my story is more, I have not had a crystal clear vision. It's just about, you know, kind of taking the next right step. But part of that process is this whole development of stories. And it's something that listening to you guys this morning, thank you guys so much. I know when you're put on the spot, like, hey, think of something, that's immediately when your brain shuts down, but you guys all did an awesome job. And so just kind of going around, you know, with you guys, it's like, you know, there was serious stuff, there was silly stuff, there was family stuff. And you think about all the emotions that were brought up in you, but then also the emotions that were brought up in us. You know, I'm also very expressive with my face, but I know I'm not the only one. And so certain things get brought up, and now it's like, I know there's a few of those stories that I'm going to be remembering now today. And I'm also big on telling stories that I hear from other people. So like the interview one, the FBI, like, yes, that is amazing. And I'm going to use that tip. So a couple quotes, because it's always good to give some quotes, so to tie up in a little more nicer way. I shared this in the comments of the last meeting. This is, what you're trying to do when you tell a story is to write about an event in your life that made you feel some particular way. And what you're trying to do when you tell a story is to get the audience to have that same feeling. And so often when we're building relationships, networking, things like that, sales, it all comes down to making that connection, because of course people want to work with people they like, know, and trust. So today, what I kind of want to do is, of course, tell you a little bit about me so you know why the heck I care about this and what experience I have with storytelling, and basically go through some ways that you can start looking at your own life to pull stories together. Often we hear big stories, you know, you hear something very exciting or big. I mean, Tiger King is freaking crazy. How could I ever compare with that? But really, when you listen to a presentation, oftentimes it's the little things, because where we really connect with people is the human condition. And that's something we all have in common. And so it doesn't take big over the top stories. Oftentimes it's just little things that tug either at people's heartstrings or gets that feeling in their stomach. It's just something that has you connect. And so what I have seen is that with the podcast, interviewing people for a year, it really confirmed my theory that all people are awesome and that you can connect with everybody. Yes, you might not be best friends with everyone, but you can find a connection with everybody. And so my favorite thing with the podcast is if I would talk to someone and they'd say, oh, I don't have any story to share. But it's as we start kind of peeling back the layers, you find that any story in your life, if it resonates with you, it's something you can use. And so that's what I hope you guys can walk away with today, is to start unpacking some stuff in your life. I won't make you do it today live on the call, but I have a worksheet I can email you so that you can kind of start pulling some of that back. So why am I passionate about stories? I am an expert at meeting people and building relationships, because as an Army brat, I grew up, you know, moving around all the time. And so I had a lot of experience of like remaking friends, and in a short amount of time. And so I learned early on that the quicker I was myself, vulnerable and authentic, the better relationships I had, because it's too much effort to try to be someone you're not. And a lot of times what I saw is, like, when I started meeting friends that lived in one place for a long time, they kind of got pegged into a certain image. And the beauty of me, I've like got to keep restarting, and through that kind of peeling back the layers. And so kind of my childhood of continually building those relationships paired with a background in sales and whatnot. I joke that I've been professionally networking since 2004. Right out of college, I joined a BNI group. I had no idea what networking was. And so I feel like I was trained on how to do it. And through that, what I loved is that I started building relationships with people that I seemingly had nothing in common with. Because so often in our life, It's what is it, like proximity? We build relationships by when we're kids, who lives by us, and who, as you get older, who you have classes with, and then who you have a job with. And as you guys all know as networkers, part of what you do in sales and building a business is finding connections with lots of different people. So as we dig into this whole idea of storytelling, I will just touch lightly on my passion and what I learned about storytelling. So my alternative title for today could be, I got to think about this for a minute and like read the room. I always like to read the room to depend on which part of my story I want to share. And we're all adults here. No one's kids are listening, right? Because I mean, we're recording, but can I do like PG-13? Can I get like a confirmation before I go there? Yeah. All right. So my alternative title was What Shitting My Pants Taught Me About Shame and Connection.
I would have bought in. Yeah. Totally bought into that one.
So don't love that. Don't love that meeting you guys for the first time. And I'm putting that out there. But what I found is that a story that I originally started telling privately, not on a freaking recorded Zoom call. It was a private story that I told to my friends because it happened. It was super embarrassing and I was going to take it to the grave. But then some stuff happened. You can tune into my podcast to hear the full version of the story. But because it became a legit medical thing, I felt free to tell it. And what I found is that, it made it for a good laugh. Like I said, I told it privately, like girls' nights and stuff. But the weirdest thing started happening. Afterwards, people would come up to me and say like, well, actually, yeah, that happened to me once. Or I'd get texts. And by the way, during quarantine, I've now gotten 3 texts from friends that it's happened to. And I started realizing, and this is where it gets serious. This is where I'm a little bit of a bait and switch person. I'm sorry. I know bait and switch isn't good in the sales world, but I am a little bit of a bait and switch. Yes, it's a crazy story. Yes, I don't love that that's my image. But this is the thing it taught me about shame, is I was going to take it to my grave. That was when it happened. I wasn't even going to tell my husband, and I told my husband everything. And I was like, nope, want him to still see me as an attractive person. So this is going to my grave. And then because of legit medical reasons, started telling people. And I thought, if I was going to take this to the grave, something so trivial, and I was going to feel like crap about myself for my whole life, how much stuff are people walking around with that they're feeling like crap about, thinking they're the only person because they can't share it? And if something this trivial is going to make me feel like I'm this horrible person, then what about the real big stuff? And so what I started finding is that when I shared it, and not necessarily professionally, and I'm not giving this tip, I would have maybe better boundaries than I do, but my product is me that I'm selling. So, there you go. But, so not everyone's meant to tell these stories. That's okay. But what I started finding is that when you put something out there, maybe not this personal, but when you put something out there, you show people you're willing to go there and you're willing to have the serious conversations. And so even though I love joking around, and even though I love funny, embarrassing stories, what I'm really about is connecting with people on a different level. So you might not have the same story, but feel free to text me afterwards and tell me it if you want, because they're always good for a good time. But there's something though that you can share with people that does scratch the surface, that does allow you to kind of go to that next step with people. So as I said, that's not going to be everyone's. I'm still rethinking. I don't know if I really want to build my brand around this, but we'll see, one step at a time. I'm still fleshing it out. So, but as I said, kind of everyone has a story. And when I've heard that, I can't wait to read these comments. I need to keep, I'm excited to see that. So as I said, everyone has a story though. Sometimes people hear that and think, oh my gosh, I could never, but it's sometimes in the smallest mundane things. And so, I wanted to give an example of a story also, just so that I'm not talking the whole time. So I need a show of hands. Who has seen Hamilton or know about Hamilton or anything? Okay, good. The other example I was going to use, but I didn't know the demographic of this group, was Chris Farley and David Spade. Can I see a show of hands of fans of those guys? Okay, yeah, either one could have worked. I'm going to go with Hamilton for today, but I have a good Chris Farley story. And so I'm going to share my screen and let's see if we can get this to work. Oh, can you, Lynn, are you here? Can you make it so I can share?
Right now.
Thank you. Okay, so the reason I want to share this is a little example. It's kind of a simple story. but it's memorable to me because this was actually in the process of when I was starting the podcast and kind of trying to think, what am I supposed to do with this creative energy? And Lin-Manuel Miranda was on the Conan O'Brien podcast. And now, if you are familiar with Hamilton, and if you're not a fan or were a fan of Lin-Manuel, you don't know. So Hamilton is this big phenomenon. It's amazing. Lin-Manuel is brilliant. Everything he does is brilliant and gold. And we and all this stuff could never do anything like he's done. And he doesn't have the same, he can't relate to me because he's just amazing. And everything he does is a creative genius. I don't know if I'm the only one who thinks those kind of thoughts, and you can replace Lin-Manuel with anyone in your life. You know, who is that person who is so amazing and you could never be like them, et cetera, et cetera. So I was listening to Conan's podcast and Lin-Manuel shared this story. And the reason I wanted to share it to you is one, just give you an example. Now his is a pretty big deal because it involves the White House and things like that. But what I want you guys to kind of hear is just the humanness of him. So here we go. Okay, do you guys see my screen? Am I fleshing it out? Okay, yep. So this is only about 4 minutes, so I'm not sucking you into a whole podcast episode. And so just to give you the setup, they were just chatting about some pop culture stuff, and he's gonna talk about when he first performed his opening number to Hamilton before it was even a musical. It was just this kind of writing project, creative project he was working on. So
laugh, but it's true. In a Milhousian voice.
Whoops, sorry.
Well, I was doing Michelle Obama a couple of times, and recently she was on the podcast, and I just love this moment. I asked her about it. I don't think we talked about it on the podcast, but when you performed at the White House and you were working on Hamilton and you performed for the Obamas, and she said, now what is this about? And you pretty much said, well, it's a rap musical multicultural exploration of Ron Chernow's Hamilton.
I don't think I said it like that.
You didn't say it like that. I'm putting a little mustard on the ball.
Yeah.
But you said that, and she was like, yeah, good luck with that. And I love you pitching it to the coolest couple in America, and they're like, okay, good luck.
Yeah.
And I love, too, that you had to, when you announced what it was, people thought it was a joke, and you had to say, please just hear me out.
The 10th anniversary of me performing that was like on Sunday, so a lot of people posted it online, and I watched it again recently. I don't think there is more footage of me being frightened, or footage of me being more frightened than I was in that moment, because you see me introduce it, everyone laughs, and I scream, you laugh, but it's true, in a Milhousian voice. And I'm stuttering, like the whole time I'm performing it, I'm looking around for like the Apollo Sandman to sweep me off the stage. I had never performed that song in public. Only my wife and Alex Lacamoire, my accompanist, had heard the song. But I also thought, if it doesn't work in this room, I'll like put it in a drawer and I'll try something else.
Who tries something out for the first time in front of the president and the first lady? Who does that?
Conrad Birdie. It was also, they said, we'd love for you to perform something from In the Heights, which was my first show. I said, unless you have something on the American Experience. And I did.
Yeah.
So I was like, I mean, if these 16 bars about Alexander Hamilton don't work here, and really that's all it was, then maybe this is dumb. Maybe this is a dumb idea. But I thought they worked. I thought they were some of my best writing, and I just needed to get out in front of it and try it. And then it worked really well.
So you left that room knowing, okay, I got this. I've got it.
Yeah, it really, I mean, basically what has happened with the show happened in miniature in that room. It went like, oh my God, this kid's crazy, to like rapt attention on the story, because the story is compelling. You know, it doesn't need mustard on the ball for me to be compelling, but it's like, oh, I didn't know all that happened to Alexander Hamilton. Oh, you're the guy who shot him, and you're in. And so I watched that happen in miniature. And what's, it's a part of the story I don't tell often, but then like I got made fun of on The Daily Show the next day.
Yeah.
Like Jon Stewart was like, did like a bit about like spoken word poetry, and he did the like, you know, like that, and like it was the first, you know, I love The Daily Show, and it was the first time I've been on the other side of a clip where they literally show me going, my name is Alexander Hamilton, and they cut to Jon Stewart and like enormous laughter. So the laughter part of it got amplified.
That clip should be burned.
Well, he's very apologetic after he saw the show many years later, but it was also, but I knew what happened in the room, so that didn't deter me. Like it hurt to be a punchline on TV, but I was like, I know what the song did in the room. I know what that chemical reaction was.
Yes.
And that was enough to keep me writing. You know, that was the performance at the White House was such a rare case of like, I'd only written that one song. I didn't have a second Hamilton song to show anyone. Right. It was just that opportunity happened, and I presented it at that opportunity. But, you know, to continue writing, it was, again, you're trying to please the room you're in, and you're trying to make sure it feels good in that room, because you can't anticipate what the world's going to think.
All righty. Can you guys hear me still? Okay, good. So I wanted to share that because when I heard that podcast, you know, like I said, I kind of had Lin-Manuel on this pedestal of that he's amazing. He could never relate to any of the things I go through. And when I heard that, it was such a reminder. I was suddenly on his side. Any creative project he wanted to do, you know, people would make fun of him, but I'm like, I'm on board with him, because this guy, you know, he knows what's up. He has those same feelings and things like that. And I'm a fan now of his. And it's not that I wasn't before, but I just wasn't invested either way. And so, as I said, the story is big as far as it's Hamilton, it's the White House. But the thing is that but I don't know about you guys, but for me, my takeaway is that it's the fear he had. It's the fact, and he shared that part. He said, this is the part of the story I don't normally share with people. I got made fun of the next day. And that to me is like, that's the story right there, is that he felt that he got made fun of and he kind of got back up again. And so what I love about storytelling, there's a whole world of storytelling. If you guys aren't familiar with the Moth and whatnot, storytelling can do two things for you personally and professionally. So my tip for today for personal is that when you look back on your life, you have the power to write your own story. So what I mean by that is that for my super embarrassing story, that could have been something that I really took to the grave. I choose to be embarrassed about, yada, yada. But I was able to reframe that, leverage a business. I'm not sure, you know, how far I'll go with it or not. I mean, I still might learn these lessons the hard way. But it's something that I can choose. I can rewrite how that story ends. I can choose how it goes. And so there's moments in your life that even if they're painful, you can look back and, you know, as we all know, because with motivation and coaching and things like that, but we can look back on those stories and choose to take a lesson out of it that can work for good. So instead of a story being something that continues to hurt us or cause us pain, embarrassment, shame, it can actually be the thing that motivates us and inspires ourselves by ourselves. The other thing professionally it can do is, as I've been saying, it helps audiences relate and connect. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is build those relationships, and it's through those stories. And so kind of bringing it back to the example in the beginning when everyone was sharing their stories, I don't know about you guys, but like I feel connected to Christina and Eric's parents, you know, and same with Alexis. I sent, you know, my best, that's scary. So I'm, you know, emotionally connected, but now I feel drawn in with your parents. And that's just from hearing a story on a screen at a group, you know? And so those are kind of the connections that we are able to build just now through Zoom. And so what I want to do is, I didn't know how to email this to you guys, so I'll just share my screen again. If you have a pen and paper, you can go ahead and there we go. Do you guys see my form? Yeah, little thumbs up.
Yep, we're good.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So what is your story? Okay. Now, as I told you guys in the beginning, I told you to do that, and immediately everyone's brains go blank. So how do you start thinking of stories though? So I'm sure you guys know, yes, this isn't a new concept for me to share with you, that stories are the way to connect. But how do you find those stories? And that's what I've found with the podcast is people say, well, I don't have a story, because you immediately start thinking of something big, or you start thinking of how can I compete with her story, or how can I match that, the level. So that's not what it's about. So get all that stuff out of your head. So to kind of make it a little simpler, if you have a pen and paper, write down 1, 2, 3. I want you to think of 3 stories that stick out from your life. To way to kind of tease this out a little bit more is, what are 3 stories that everybody knows about you in your friend circle, in your family circle? Or if you have a lesson that you use, is there certain, kind of stories or anecdotes that you use? A crazy coincidence or a close call, an epic win or failure, embarrassing, scary, those are all good. Then another thing, and we can't do this today, but memory triggers. So basically those are the photos, keepsakes, clothes, visits, places. It's amazing what kind of gets brought up when you start looking through things. You grab your old picture album, you start going through it. My personal favorite is to get together with friends over drinks and start rehashing, because once someone tells a story, then you tell a story, or they remind you of stories from your childhood or just past adulthood recently. So we'll give you a second just to kind of brainstorm that. Some questions that you can ask, and I think this was alluded to at the last meeting. It was kind of, what's the charity you're passionate about? Those are kind of ways you can think through is, is there a motto or a creed that you live by? Why? So for me, as you heard, like with the podcast, I'm always asking people, I always want to know the why. If you care about something, there's a why in there. So start thinking about, what is that motto or creed? What are you passionate about? My favorite question to ask is, what are you passionate about? Because a lot of times it's a different than what we'll end up talking, like what we were planning to talk about on the podcast ends up being totally different because I asked the question, what are you passionate about? And I would much rather talk about what gets people fired up than the ho-hum, whatever their presentation is. You can have your earliest memories. What did you learn? What's a memory from learning right and wrong, or a memorable conversation you had, or something you thought you believed in as a kid and now you're like, that is not what I believe anymore. Some challenges. All right, does everyone have kind of a couple stories written down? I'm not going to ask you to do anything with them just yet, or at all, really, so don't worry. They can stay private. You don't need to share on a Zoom call your most deepest embarrassing story like me. All right, so the second thing is, what sticks out about each story? Do you have a positive or negative feelings associated with it? And the reason I say that is because one of the best tips I got is that when you share a story, it needs to be a scar, not a wound. So obviously some stories are just funny, but there are deeper stories that I think are important to share. And using mine as a super trivial example, that's something that I am only sharing now because I've kind of worked through it and gotten to a place of I'm okay talking about it, but not everyone is like that. But a friend of mine, she told a story at a storytelling event, and it was actually she had a suicide attempt, and it's super serious and heavy. And so when she was talking about telling the story, they asked her, is it a scar, not a wound? Because if it's a wound, it's too fresh. And so, but if it's a scar and you are at a good place, then obviously those are the stories that can really impact people and help people. So the reason I wanted to put that in there is that some of these stories, if they kind of bring up triggering memories that you are not worked through, then that is not a story you want to share, because I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Brene Brown. She talks a lot about shame. And as I said, I'm also big on boundaries. And so when you are sharing personal stories from your life, you want to make sure that you're in a good place, because you don't want to offer a piece of you that could be used in a way, that is harmful to you. So you always want to be sure it's a scar, not a wound. So you can rattle off some quick things about kind of your takeaway. Now there's 2 different ways with stories and lessons to kind of go through this. So I kind of had you guys go from the story to kind of start thinking of the stories and then pulling out the lessons. But you can of course go from lessons to story. So if there's a point you want to bring up. So I kind of have some tips on the opening, the action, and the end. And so when you start to, if you have a story that you think, okay, I do want to use this in a sales presentation, or I mean, even in a networking coffee, there can be some things in your life that kind of show, like I said, I love knowing the why you are the way you are. And so with opening, and I can email you guys to this, but it's just basically, you want to open with a quick context, not spend forever setting it up. And who was it? Who said the example of the guy who told the story, the handyman, Dan told the story. Yeah. So you said the guy started it in the middle and then it was all over the place and whatnot. And so obviously that's okay because it's almost like he's a character, but if you're the one telling it and you want people to have a takeaway, you want to have the clear, concise context to kind of set it up. And then the action, a great tip I got is that if you're thinking of telling a story, you want each piece to be like a domino. So it helps further the story. So that's a way if you're kind of just thinking through the bullet points of your story, what parts you want to add, what are important. And then of course, wrapping it up. And wrapping it up, that's where the good stuff is, because that's where you can tell people, kind of what you got from it. But what I love, and this is another lesson I've learned with talking to people and interviewing people over the last year, is that your takeaway might not be someone else's takeaway. And so I use this example when I was at the meeting earlier in the week. Amy Cresmano, Word, she's a guest on the podcast, episode 19. Highly recommend listening to her because she's amazing. So she told a hilarious story, and she said, her takeaway was you have to hold on and fight through things. And I said, well, me listening to that story, I actually think sometimes you need to know when to let go. And so we had this whole funny conversation about how, we heard the same story, but we each had different takeaways. And so with some of these stories, as you are, maybe they're kind of coming up in your mind and you're thinking, I don't know if I could, or I'd want to tell this. A great tip is to have lunch with some friends, have a networking event, and kind of start telling the stories. And then you can see what resonates with people and what takeaways they have, because that might help shape your story as well. And so you don't have to come up with it on your own. You're able to kind of see what resonates with people. And at the end, these are some kind of things that you can think, and this can be done before you have the story or after, depending on, but a way to kind of figure out is, why are you telling the story? What impact might your story have on other people? What do you want to achieve by telling the story? And who must you reach to achieve your goals? So kind of, who's your audience and why are you telling it? What is unique about your story, and what are the most important points to tell your story? So a fun activity I did during quarantine to keep myself sane is I went live with past podcast guests. And Emily Yarrison, who helped me create this, we did an exercise. I can just stop sharing this and I can email this to you guys. That way you guys can see everyone. So we did an exercise where she went through, she's an English teacher, she's a storyteller, she won the Moth Grand Slam, if you're familiar with that, in Washington, D.C. And so she has definitely a gift. And what we did is she gave some tips on how to craft a story. And so you can kind of see that. But what I did is I said, I have this memory from middle school and it comes back to me, but I can't think how to use it, like for a lesson or a connection with anyone. But it's a little traumatizing, but thankfully still trivial. I went to the roller skating rink, because this was back in middle school in the 90s. Yeah. And so 10 o'clock at night, middle schoolers got to go to the roller skating rink. And I was with new girls. I had just moved to New Jersey, and I ordered French fries, and I grabbed the salt packet and I ripped it open and I sprinkled it on my fries. And I realized at that moment it was sugar. And I was mortified. And I didn't want anyone to know. So I just picked up my sugar fries and I just ate my sugar fries. And so I'm telling her this and I'm like, this is like a traumatic memory, but I don't know what the point is. Like, why would I tell the story? And as soon as I told it to her, she was like, oh my gosh, like this is such a good teaching moment of how when you are in middle school, like to talk to parents about it, to say, if you are a parent of a kid, they come to you with a problem that we know is no big deal. So you put sugar on your fries, who cares? But I remember in my late 30s, I still am like, oh my gosh, I put that sugar on the fries and I just ate it. It was like embarrassment with every bite. And so being able to use that to, you know, if you're speaking to parents or something, or, you know, just anyone out of an embarrassing, and she came up with really good things. So anyway, I think that, you know, as I said, there's certain things from your life, like if it's stuck with you for a reason. And all you need to do is share it with someone to kind of tease out, you know, why that thing is there. So does anyone, I won't put you on the spot, but if anyone has a story that they are like, yeah, I have this, but you know, this is what I think I want to do. Or if you want to kind of get some group input, because as I said, that's a really great way to tease it out. I would love to hear you.